Hey friends, and welcome back. This is Tyler Ellen here, and I got a great long form video for you guys this week. It's going to be for any kind of art student right now, whether you're training for visual development or if you want to get into concept art. We're going to learn how to break down and analyze some reference or your subject matter. We're going to talk a little bit of art and design theory, and we're going to talk about how to implement that all and get into some artistic expression. So there's going to be a great painting demo along the way as well. So guys, I hope you enjoy this. Let me know what you think, of course, in the comments below, and let's get into this. So what I want to do here is just kind of analyze what is going on in this picture. I can see there's a few more or less like horizontal lines here. There's another horizontal line roughly about right there. There's another one here. And this is what a lot of people struggle to kind of learn and to pick up ultimately, is how we can break down and analyze some of these basic shapes and proportions to find essentially what sort of design, is kind of going on under the hood. So what I'm looking for here, of course, is the proportions, the flow, and the balance. So I can already see this picture naturally has a lot of the same elements of, repetition, and line and movement. So for example, when I look at this area, I am analyzing that there is an inherent sort of line going on that's going like this. This may eventually kind of help figure out the forms as well. Like you can literally see like there's a bit of a slope here, and then it goes further in the back and further in the back and so on. Now there is also very similarly here as well. We might, in terms of breaking down and understanding something like this, you can start with just like the bigger pieces of the backdrop like I just did, or you could just simply start with the focal element and kind of just putting that in roughly where you need to. Now there is of course some natural kind of perspective going on here. I'm just kind of foregoing that to avoid getting into a massive tangent, of a perspective lesson, but this is basic 2-point perspective, so I'm not gonna just go crazy with it, and nor am I gonna just fuss with it, overall. Pretty much this shape and this element, this design, this nice piece of architecture is more or less just doing something kind of like this. So you might notice here I'm not getting very fussy at all with the shapes or with the accuracy of what I'm doing here. I'm just simply trying to represent what is kind of going on in here. I'm doing a lot of observing. So we know, proportion wise, this is doing something kind of like this. There is a little bit of we can kind of see like a little bit of something going on under there. We could put the bush here, like that could be a shape. It's definitely there. But part of the beauty of this is I'm interpreting this, like I'm looking at it. If I don't have a spot for that bush, or I don't think it's helping the design, I can simply remove it, and it's no skin off my back. I don't need it. I'm trying to represent this as an idea. So the other parts that we can look at like this is the contrast of shapes. So this is right here, right? The back, the sky. This is a very big and simple shape, and that's also kind of why I like it. There's a few other really nice big shapes in this picture. There is a shape right here that the structure pretty much rests on, right? Again, I'm figuring that out in blue, and it's doing, right, as we saw, right, something kind of like that. So there's like two big shapes. Then these are more or less made up of a handful of medium ones. So when you hear someone says you got to figure out the shapes, or the shapes matter, this is part of what they mean. That could go kind of even like that. The smaller shapes going into something like this, right? Like this piece, like these little shapes in here, those aren't nearly as important. They don't matter nearly as much, yet. We could start to break this thing down, into fewer, smaller little pieces, but I don't think that's really what is the important thing, kind of going on here. But for now, like, let's just say if we were to push this all the way, this could represent like our final line art. I'm not going to go there today. One of the most important things I have to stress there, I'm not necessarily focusing on literal objects yet, right? Like, so when I look at this and I break this down, this is not about this is a hill or this is grass with snow covering on it. It's just a shape, and with shapes we can kind of create forms, and with forms we can start to direct movement, all right, with those original lines. So I'm like thinking with these lines here, I can feel like the energy kind of brings us over like this, and eventually that can kind of start sliding, right, and scaling up like so. In the backdrop, we're doing that as well. Again, it's going to push us toward that focal point. Likewise over here, right, we're kind of going down like that. And this is just me simply kind of trying to understand what's going on in the picture. I think in the backdrop as well, we're going to have pieces and shapes come down like that. So this is what I mean by sort of like we can create a sense of flow and movement within a piece. I don't think there's anything that I have to worry about in terms of like tangents. I think, the main subject itself takes, it's a good like 30% of the image. So 70%, right, is the backdrop. It's a 70-30 rule. It's a design principle. I think it's well balanced, in that regard. And I think there's good shape contrast. So like I said, there's big shapes, there's small shapes, there's medium shapes, and now we have movement. So basically from here, and this is one of the questions I see you guys mention a lot, is like, how do you take something like a line art or a drawing, and what do you do from there? Well, for me, and well, actually, there's a lot of things we could do here. We could start to figure out the flat colors. We could put those in. We could figure out light and dark relationships, so light and shadow. You could keep refining the drawing. You could build up texture with an underpainting. There's about 4 or 5 really solid things that we could do from, let's say, a finished line drawing. I'm not going to get into that today. Maybe if you want a whole separate video on that, guys, please let me know. And maybe we could work that out. But I think for now, a good simple thing to do is start to just build this up and define some basic shapes. These don't necessarily have to be super accurate to what's going on. We just want to basically fill this with some information to kind of see how things work. So I'm going to play it very safe. I am going to choose some basic colors that are in the shot or in the scene. Like, I know this is kind of doing this. This is going to do this. This is kind of coming down right here like that. Now this talks about, now this kind of can start to establish some figure to ground sort of things. Like, can we establish our focal element in the scene? Well, if we shut our line art off, not exactly yet. But if we were to just block this in with a shape that's different than everything else, so in this case, I'm using a warm shape. Every other shape in this scene so far is in fact relatively cool color by comparison. So this is a fantastic way to get something noticeable right on screen, which is great if it's a focal point and we do want it to grab some attention. Again, we could shut the line art off. It has some misses. I got a little wonky than desired in places. I can easily kind of clean that up, at this point, doing a few things like this. But, for the most part, that could represent our idea. Well, what about everything else? Well, I still think that this is a great sort of thin little line, design-wise. And that's what I'm doing with design. I'm trying to understand the shapes, the patterns, the repetition. There's some kind of line down here. Again, it doesn't really matter if it's orange or if it's green. I'm just simply trying to make a few marks to understand this. Now let's see where things are at. Okay, there is a big line there. So maybe that is something I can initially kind of block out to understand that. So, right, we'll reference our line here. I'm going to use actually a little digital cheat here, digital hack. I can use this magic wand tool just to select the purple so I can really draw through forms. So like right here, I could see like draw through, right? Like there's a line or a hill in this case, right? Kind of going like that. So I just want to get that situated like that wherever, we're comfortable, right? We can really start to see some of these pieces coming together now. This piece here in the backdrop, that is a good solid line. Again, we want to break that up. We could just go marginally a little bit darker. I think that's as good as place as any, right? To kind of start with that, right? There's like a little bit of a shape separation right there. And these trees kind of make their own shape. So I'm, again, not necessarily representing, I'm not trying to find the exact elements here. Like I'm not painting trees. I'm not painting slopes. I'm just simply creating an abstract representation of this as my own mind and my eye interprets it, which is kind of fun. So like I'm doing all straight lines. You could break things up. You could have, right, a few smaller marks. I don't want to paint every tree here. That would be, right, that would be super redundant. If I want to separate that space out, perhaps I could take this and, right, further push this, right, even more, right? So I could select this as a piece, as a shape. And really what we want to do here, right, is establish relationships with all these pieces. So see, like here, still can't, there's not too much of a difference in relationship. But if I do this, okay, well that makes a little more, right, visual sense. Again, I could take that and now see if we break this apart, we can now see this shape from this shape, right? Everything else, right, is a little bit different now. And so we can understand these relationships much better. This still looks all the same, right? So again, if I wanted to keep this as a design mark, which I like, and I do want to keep, part of that, I could start to bring that in, wherever, right, wherever I need to. See, I'm making smaller, tighter, more refined little shapes. And in here, we're more or less doing, right, the same. So I could see it and understand it like that. So that's good. This kind of goes up a little more. So like maybe I'd want to bring this up. But see, with analyzing and breaking down shapes, again, what I'm doing is some shapes are straight, right? Some shapes may be curved. So like maybe I do want to curve this out a little bit, or curve this one, or kind of curve that one, or break this up. This one could be a little more busier or like more chunky looking. This could always be straight. So I'm looking for things like that. Now this is a very boring shape here, and I'm looking to start to add little bits of excitement going on in here. Like this is fun, this is fine. It's also fairly static still at this point. I think we could spice it up, and that's what I look to when I'm looking at this. Like I know there's certain things going on that we didn't add yet. We could echo those original sort of design shapes we have, like lines and energy, like that. And again, all I need is difference. I could put something lighter there, right? So it might look like this. I could create some sort of shape to help create some movement and energy. So maybe it's doing that, right? Maybe it's doing this. See, it literally does not matter what I'm doing here. I'm simply having fun interpreting this. And I'm trying to create, right, something with a little bit of variety going on in here as well. If you take that shape, bring it down, or I could take this shape, right, bring it down like that. I'm representing what could possibly be going on here. Like here it's like really dense, right, fairly busy. There's simple areas, right, all these very nice design fundamentals. I think, And I really do feel behind every good image is a very good design fundamentals. Something like that. Now we can kind of represent that. There's some nice darker shapes too. So like I could select just those darker pieces if I wanted, like that. And this is all on one layer. I am not getting fancy. And I could start to, right, I could start breaking up that, right, with more interesting marks. So what am I doing here? I'm just adding other rhythms and other patterns to help break up, right, all of this in the scene. I'm still not thinking of this is rocks. I have to get rocks in. No, this is just something part of the visual aesthetics, right, of all of this. Again, I'm trying to make, this is visual design 101 here, right? I'm trying to make an image pleasing to the eye without context or subject. It's simply just existing, in a sense, in a vacuum. We're not creating something with pure functionality in mind. There's nothing really with some kind of inherent theme. We're just making something look good for the sake of it looking good. And of course, these initial choices will affect the final design. See, there's big clumps, there's small clumps, there's long ones, there's short ones. This is a big shape, smaller shapes. Always we could continue breaking, right, these things out more and more. So this is good. It's kind of almost like we have lighting in the scene just by breaking up some of these shapes. But that could be another really big step that we do in this picture. We could figure out lighting. Sometimes, to play it safe, we could make another layer and simply just figure out with simple marks all the shapes or patterns of light in an image. Just with one color, and we can kind of figure it out from there. So right, like this, for example, it's not necessarily the actual color of the lighting here, but it's going to help us organize this piece of information. That's all this is information. There still needs to be a good amount of contrast worked into this across, value, spacing, direction. I think if we lean into that, exaggerate some of that as we go, again, in maybe the next segment, we can really push this. And just because much like the universe itself, I do feel good design is made up of opposing forces, right? Like in nature, there's order and patterns to almost everything. And, our minds really do recognize this, and we try to understand it. I always talk about this, humans, for example, innately try to organize almost everything we see, and we want to really kind of comprehend it in a number of ways and to organize it so that there is rhythms, there's orders, there's pattern, even if there's not any. And it can have its, drawbacks when it comes to drawing or design, because through sheer muscle memory alone, we can make really repetitive marks or lines and shapes. And I don't think it's inherently bad, as long as us, the artists and the creator, are aware of this and, fight to remain in control. And that has to do with a certain amount of mastery, right? To over time, a lot of what I'm doing here, I'm doing, through automatic execution. I am, intentionally going slow here to explain it, but it's just through that raw repetition and that solidification of my understanding that I can just observe it and it translates quicker. So I expect if you have less experience or you're in the beginning of your artistic and design journey, if this, for example, takes me 20 minutes and you do the same thing in an hour, that is totally cool, right? And that's totally understandable, and it's not a race. But I do also want to show this to you as well, because I'm making very slow, deliberate marks and calculations. This is not a speed test. This is not a speed painting. I don't think there's a lot to be gained from doing those. These colors are quasi-accurate or representative of what's going on here, but I'll show you in a second. It really actually does not matter so much at all. because we're looking for relationships. I'm just getting this to look different than this to look different from this, right? And so on and so forth. Because this is how we're gonna really analyze, this design. This is actually cool. It's got a shape there. We can include that. That would be fun. Right, there's some light going on a little bit more over there, but I think for now, this could represent our idea, right? So I'm gonna copy that essentially, and we could check things out. We could see if we're relying too much on color, too much on value. We need to be pretty consistent with our rule set. So this is a great way to check it out. And I'll look at that and I'll see like, okay, this maybe perhaps blends too much in with this. So if we want to make this look or read better, right, I will have to take this piece of separation and probably go a little bit further. Like I want that shape to stick out more from the other one. So, right, if I go back to this, it right now is doing that very well because this is warm and this is cool. But values are stronger than color. So I do want to push that, just a bit more. I think I could get away easily by going a little darker and maybe slightly even cooler. So up here, nudge it toward a bit. I nudge it toward a little bit more of a cooler color. See, like this one, that will fit right way better, right, like there. Or I could even make that different, right, by lighting it a little bit differently there. But I think for a lot of blockouts, for what I aim for, I think this is pretty good. It does lack some drama and things, but if you're just doing like a study, like I did, you could spend 20 minutes on it, right, give or take, kind of what we just did here, and that could be good enough as a base to really start building things up, even more, and to start getting in, transitioning from the technical side to more of the expressive one. All right, so we're kind of like at the 22-ish minute mark here. Let's take some time to make some observations and notes on that. This is fine. I think this is going, playing it really safe, trying to replicate this. This again is something pretty typical that we would that I hit, at this early in, and a lot of students may end at something kind of like this, that it is representative of the subject matter to some degree, but it's just kind of like okay, and it's still a little boring because it's a little safe, and it is absolutely okay to make a bad or a painting you just kind of feel blah about, right? That's perfectly normal, especially too if you're grinding these things out daily, which I certainly recommend if you want to improve your painting skills, your design skills, your observational skills. Like if you want to do that, like definitely be doing at least one of these a day. Right now, if I want to proceed with this, I think I'd have to get technically a bit more specific, artistically a little bolder, and visually a little sweeter. I was just simply focused on accurately recreating what I saw in a sort of one-to-one sort of way, and as a result, the work becomes a poor derivative of that if I'm just measuring it in those regards, and it really doesn't have anything to say for itself. And the only thing now, like at this point, that would separate this, let's say, like, just to compare it to where I kind of ended up taking it, the only thing that really separates that to this is a lot of little subtle things, right? This is at about 90 minutes. This is, right, like 25 minutes. And it's about 90 minutes of raw finesse. That finesse is exactly a bunch of small, subtle things, because structurally, more or less, it's exactly the similar. Sure, I add a few shapes in here or there, but for the most part, it is not doing anything too different, right? So if I were just continuing on this thought and wanted to just make some really quick, bold changes before committing, I could do something like, organizing value structures and stuff, right? So I could like select this, this, and this. See, like this could all be grouped together, or if I'd want to measure something like this, I could, because it groups really well, and it's a foreground, it's a focal piece. I could create, right, like a more dramatic sense of contrast. See, if I wanted to knock it back in a shadow, if I wanted to change the lighting, right, I could do something kind of like that. I think that's a little much, but if I go darker in some of these cases like this, if I want to bring back, right, even more light, I could do that, right, very easily. Or like select this, for example, right, and erase, right, some of that light, back on. Or in this case, if we grab like a fun brush mode, like color dodge or something, and if I want that, right, to, where is it? The airbrush. That's why we don't use color dodge, right? Because it's gonna blow it out. Let's do something a little more subtle. Yeah, see, overlay. Overlay is the new color dodge. There we go. Looks a little bit better. So you can see even with like another minute worth of adjustments, we could start to bring this even further, for the most part. But that's probably one of my personal, griefs with this at this point, is I can't really feel the lighting. It doesn't really make me feel anything. Like, I want to express how cool and how fresh this place is. I really want to play up the architecture, being pitted against the natural environment, with lots of these dynamic shapes. And I want to kind of, portray the peacefulness, the tranquilityness of nature itself here, opposing these really cool man-made structures. So I start to dig deeper in terms of those feelings, those expressions, as I'm going to move this forward in the next section. All right, so we're going to shift gears a little bit at this point. The lesson will still be kind of continuous and on the same, but essentially what I have here is, you'll notice the painting looks a little bit different. That's because this was one of my students' studies of the same image, and it is also a fault of a lot of what my study was just too. Like, we can't really feel the lighting. It's perhaps playing too safe. A lot of the shapes aren't necessarily there. You'll see like a lot of a little bit more of a chunkier, kind of chalkier brush stroke around. There's nothing wrong with that, right? If I made a comment on that, that would be largely, subjective, of course. But I do want to, like, if I'm trying to figure out a design, be really clear and really careful with what my shapes are doing overall, so that they will be, fairly eye pleasing. So what I'm going to start to do on the student here, this at the time when I recorded this, which is like a little more than a week ago, I'm basically giving a demo a little bit on brushwork and color and light, and we're going to basically kind of transform this into the version that I kind of ended up with, painting over essentially the whole thing. And that starts one of the most basic lessons with color and light, as you could see here, to start to push that forward, because a lot of students will even get up to this rough blocking phase, right, and not really sure what to do with it. Well, without jumping wholeheartedly into something like texture or detail, think of what parts of your image or your subject is getting affected or hit by direct light, right? Which in this case is the whole right facing surface of the structure. So where the light hits, that is a great place to be a little more accurate and a little bit more clear with your texture, as we're going to see a lot of little subtleties in there. Now, also as a result, you basically only have like the color would be derivative of only like two things, right? The surface object and the light source itself. And that light source, as Marco Bucci says, is going to bully it, right? It's going to bully that color to becoming closer toward it. So it's just going to get lighter and brighter. I think that's, a very apt way of describing what's happening here. But then, of course, we're going to have the shadow side, which is very different. We're going to have atmospheric light. We're going to have that ambient light coming in. We're going to have bounce light. We're going to have the core shadow. We're going to have the object's local value, all in shadow. And that see, it's a little more complicated, but we can compromise on that by A, not being as detailed, and B, we don't have to be as texture specific since it is in the shadow. So by creating all these hierarchies and priorities of, okay, we're going to emphasize this in the light, we'll de-emphasize this in the shadow, we'll have things this sharp here and things this softer or this implied here, right? We're creating that contrast that will innately and inevitably make the image, if we do it all right, a little more interesting, because we're playing up that artistically. Now, what I'm doing here, you don't need any of these brushes, but you can grab them, of course, by simply just subscribing to the newsletter from the Brush Sauce Academy site. You can get all my brushes, but like there's not a right or wrong brush, right? It's kind of how you use the tool that matters. So like I said, I've been giving away these brushes for years. It's not going to necessarily transform you into some wizard with the brush. It's through experience, right? And it's how you're going to interpret and how you're going to use those tools that'll really make a huge impact in your work. So like, for example, I'm pushing the verticality or the diagonal lines in that one ground shape. I'm playing here with like, what if this was like a little more rounded? Of course, I didn't like that, so I removed it. So I'm still trying to play with all that foundational design that we did in like that first 5 or 10 minutes. It all comes back to that. See here, I'm like, if this is like really sharp and jaggedy over here, I want it crisper, simpler on this side, right? Simple versus complex, or sharp versus round. I'm trying to put in at this stage those dozen or so little bit of differences that I mentioned are going to be in how I balance this amount of contrast in the picture, and this will be from light or to dark, warm to cool, like very big aspects of design and contrast, to much more subtle. Like, is this shape doing this, or is this line this thick or this long versus this short, right? You could do lots of little subtlety. So I'm still doing, as you can see, a little bit of measuring in terms of like, okay, that's all kind of very even. So I could add more drama to this essentially by adding much stronger senses of verticals. Like, I want the mountains to feel a little taller, or the valleys to feel a little deeper, or the air to feel a little cooler. I have to exaggerate. This is why with figure work, they always say you have to like over exaggerate, your pose, by like 50%, because innately when you get in there and you're going to tighten it up and you're going to render it, make all the details, it's going to get stiffer anyway. So like the way to compensate is to go a little further at the start, right? And the same thing with like a two-dimensional picture like this. I'm trying to make it look, very three-dimensional, have a lot of depth. I have to exaggerate the lighting. I have to put more atmosphere in this than there actually is, to really get that amount of depth, that I want in the scene. But it's the fact that I'm actually going through and not just like artistically making those decisions moment to moment, but I'm kind of committing to them, knowing what I want from this, I think is a huge difference. Like a lot of students they're always just so caught up in just really replicating that. And again, I think that there's a place for that, like in the first segment of the picture, to understand your structure, to break it down. But I like to encourage my own students to not stop there, to eventually try to let your image find that voice, because we all know that art can and often enough is boring, even if it's technically well executed, right? So even in my own life, my private life, my professional life, I'm constantly trying to do less but improve upon more, even improve like the things that I am doing, what's left. So like if I'm trying to like cut a part of my business, that'll allow me to double up and to put more effort into parts that are left there. Or like if I only have 4 to 3 hours of time with my kids instead of like 8, I can do more in that time. It's always doing less but improving like the quality that is there. Less is more is another common phrase used to do this. Now here, this is where I start to get a little more adventurous with this. Like, I kind of understand this structure. It's kind of like wooden. It's got like a concrete foundation. Structurally, there's a lot of vertical lines and rhythms to that as well. And so this is where I'm having fun. Like I've kind of played it safe to this point. I'm gonna just play with these shapes, these forms, heck, even these materials, and I want to see where it's gonna take me. I'm just along for the ride when I'm creating this at this point. I start to transition, shut off the technical side of everything. I've already diagnosed the image. I've stood back. I've looked at it. I've assessed it, and now it's like, what could I really do with the pieces that are here? And you'll see some things, of course, not work out. You'll see some things that do work out, like the fact that I put that image, this additional shape in the background. I like that, but it also at the same time, if it's that far away, there's no way it would probably work as the same proportion as the other one. And again, there's a certain amount of evenness to this that to the image's fault, where it's like I'd have to change the proportions of that. You try to get that to overlap in a decent enough way that it kind of fits well in the design. So that's something to notice. If you're going to change something up in a picture, and this is going to pertain to a lot of students that invent a lot of their own things, you have to, of course, take into account like how it's going to affect the picture as a whole. So often enough, it is good to start with less and then see what you can do to add things in without diluting that message, right? Stripping down things to simplicity is what I need to make sure everything is balanced, initially, right, with that proper distribution of contrast, and then I can play from there. Contrast itself, right, it's going to create the drama, as I mentioned, and the simplicity is going to create the beauty in this picture. And so it's my mind really that is simply the funnel for all of this, and that it translates it. And this is also too why I'm particularly at this stage not concerned whether this piece as a whole is objectively kind of good or bad. I'm in the zone, just expressing myself, and I'm really just focused at more, and I'm really just so focused more at representing this image as to what it's about and what that feeling is. And I do think, and I teach to my students that if like you don't have an emotion when you're creating a particular piece like this at this particular stage, that's what the viewer is going to feel when they're done. Like, because we've laid the groundwork, we got the foundation in there, that's the art 101 stuff. But beyond there, if you just leave it at that, it's just going to be another static, stiff piece of work, or painting and drawing into the void of things. So getting beyond that is tricky, and it's everybody does it differently, for sure. But for me, I try to have to tap into the emotional side a little bit, and I'm not an artsy fartsy kind of person. I still like my design fundamentals. I still like making bold decisions, but I guess that's as artsy as I get. I never like actually paint a piece from scratch to express a feeling or something that I have. I've never been that sort of creator, but I try to bring that into the ideas, into the aesthetics of ideas too. So it's like I guess I eventually kind of hit the same thing. Personally, I just kind of take the side door rather than the main entrance to that art, that art way, if that makes any sense. But yeah, I'm adding a few smaller details, as you can see at this point, and up till recently in this, I have avoided all those big or all these smaller shapes. I've still don't zoom in whatsoever. This recording might be, of course, zoomed in a little more to just give you guys a better view of things, but this image it's not big on my screen as far as I'm concerned. It's small. It allows me to just sit back, take it in as a whole, and if I wanted to add more details, I could always just up-res it. I could always zoom in later, but I don't think it more or less is going to make this image any better at this point. It's going to say exactly what it needs to say without all those smaller details. And of course, to circle back, that's what I'm referring to as well by the less is more's approach. So if I can represent like all of these boards and all that surface treatment on the light side of that structure with 2 to 3 brush strokes to cover the whole thing rather than individually hand painting every little boat, which would take thousands of brush strokes. If I could do those thousands of brush strokes or hundreds with a dozen or less, that's what I'm referring to. All right, yeah, I got some. So the other thing on a technical side that I guess I am doing a little bit here is that I had the shapes right from before that are clear or that they're sharp enough that the edges are holding the piece together at this point. So I'm using the structural foundation of those shapes and expressing the brushwork within those shapes. And I feel as long as I stay within those shapes, I can kind of control and balance the image as a whole. So see, like here, I'm going crazy. I'm going bananas with this texture. I found this brush in the brush box here. I don't think I've used this one in like 6 years, but I really like a little that, like I could feel like the tooth of that texture. I like that. I want to bring a little bit of this, this fun sort of energy into the mountains. So I'm not, I don't care at all about the edges or any of that. I'm just kind of getting this texture where I want it to. And then on the second part of this application of this brush stroke or these marks that I did, I'll then bring it, as you can see here, exactly to where I want within those shapes. And if it doesn't, like it's still bleeding into the main building, I could just simply delete that. But now I know that, it's not in the sky, it's restrained within the mountain itself, not the sky, not the building. And I just see a little bit of it popping through. And for me, that's what really gives it, a little bit of that energy. It's just adding that in. It's very hard to execute on something in one clear sort of pass or go. So I am doing what I often refer to as a bit of a build-up method. Some of those trees, I want them to be a little sharper and a little more clear on, but not every one of them. So I am using a little shape to poke some of those out. And this for me is, and I guess in the scope or span of my professional career, has been one of the more challenging aspects. Like as a student and early into the career, right? It's more so about proving to myself, proving to my colleagues or the community that I am technically proficient at doing A, B, or C. I could do an environment here. I can do a character lineup over here. And that gets good. That can eventually even lead to jobs. This is more about, even in my designs, right? My ability to communicate, what I do and why I do it is becoming the most essential skill that I think I'm working on. And literally, like I shift gears in this painting, I am, shifting gears elsewhere to just kind of, it's all about that communication for me. And if I can communicate something with that, the technical skill, I think that will help that. But you almost need the technical skill first as a baseline, I think, in most situations, right? Most sort of image making too, especially if we're talking about entertainment industry art, visual development art, right? Art for games, art for animation, art for movies even. That's where a lot of it is. All right, so I'm just going over a lot of this at this point too. I'm crossing my T's, dotting my I's for some of these shapes. I'm bouncing around. I'm not spending a ton of time in one particular area, and I'm literally taking laps around the image to kind of make sure things are there. And I know, like, The background's still not where I need it to be, but for the most part, this is all in place. And it'll be even a little bit, for the most part, the more subtle things moving out from here. All right, so we've got it this far. All the big pieces are into place. I've expressed myself through this. I'm adding a few remaining kind of components as I feel my way through this. It obviously doesn't have things like cloud and like wind really in that picture. It does feel a little static like that. So I like to explore because I could that sort of aspect at this later stage because I know I don't need it. And if I do add it, I want it to, really supplement the picture, to really add to it in that sort of regard, and that I'm not just overworking it and just like sticking it in for the sake of it. I do want to make it look interesting, and of course part of this too is from my own experience of creating production art for like a decade, where with like concepts and stuff, we're constantly adding atmosphere and things like that to either just save on time, to simplify areas, or to make something look visually further away than it actually is. Again, all very valid strategies. So I try to, of course, have a little bit of artistic take with implementing a design aspect like that, and I'm just playing with that here. So if I generally get this far with the study and push it as far as I want, I do want to see how I can apply everything I learned and observed up to this point. And now, right, I'm purely letting my imagination take over. And I do feel it's a good use of implementation, right? So I've practiced earlier on. I did the study, literally did a study, and now I'm essentially kind of putting it all to the test as I'm taking that test now by trying to further push things without any sort of rule or guidebook. And I think to do this does require a certain mastery of the craft, which ultimately, kind of simply just takes time and practice, deliberate practice to truly control the outcome of our designer picture. That's what we all want to do. We want to really have that feeling and that sense of control over the medium, over the tools, and over what pictures we make, right? At least I do. And doing this once, just creating a decent looking picture is not enough, but to really deliver constantly, to that I like, no matter what subject or study that I grab, if with enough focus and maybe like a good chunk of 2 hours, I can start to refine that out in the way that I need to. And as an artist, I'm constantly just drawing from that mental playbook. This is a mental playbook now that is literally over a decade in the making, of course, and these are rules that I've picked up and from observations that I've made, and it's all kind of coming out at once during this process, right? I'm externalizing it as the art itself, and that's part of the fun. That's part of the magic of creating. That's why for me creating never gets old, and that's why for me creating, like, there's never a shortage of ideas. It's all just things that I'm constantly taking in, visual cues, stories I read, video games I play, memories I'm making with my kids. There's like things that I want to just produce. It's a constant input and output cycle in those regards. And right on the thought of having like this mental internal kind of playbook or rule book. Generally, as we keep developing these new rules and ideas in regards to the art, and what our standards are for these, the chances are going to keep increasing in regards to our results. So, right, it does take a good amount of input and output for years to get that mastery. Simply learning a few key tips and buzzwords like in a video like this about the rules of thirds or big, medium is small is not enough. And that's also part of why I have no problem just like I love just giving you guys information and food for thought, because I do want you guys to take away from this, to think about it. And then, of course, you have to start asking yourself, as I did for years, how can I implement these principles? How can I practice this? How can I work this into my picture? It's that critical thought and process there that becomes part of the grind, that it will, in term, like for all of us, it becomes more and more automatic in execution the more you do it. And right, muscle memory, that's what, if you see like an artist or any kind of performer talking about muscle memory, that's what it's referring to. Just going and audit, like this, I'm kind of taking my time with, because I'm explaining it. It was, a demo for students, but like if I'm just in my zone and just doing this, it just flows and it goes a lot faster. But yeah, this is all of us, and myself included, just using that muscle memory to develop a process that will create consistency. And of course, over time as well, I don't have to, and you won't have to exert yourself in that process in the earlier stages, and maybe even in the final stages. It will become a little more comfortable. But again, if you're always just at least kind of challenging yourself 20% even every image, and keep the other 80% something fairly comfortable, something that you have some experience with, it's a great way to constantly learn and develop your sense of control. So it's like, okay, I'm already doing something I'm pretty familiar with, but how can I slightly improve upon that, right? It's the slight little gains over time that will really add up. And it's not necessarily, right, like just about emulating what the pros are doing. Kind of like much what I did here is just take part of our reality, take real world reference, break it down, take even like a master study or a movie still. You break it down and really try to understand it. And just too many times online, whether it's in a social media group or even with my own students, there's a constant pressure, and I think online has a lot to do with that, to just rush and get something finished, to get that dopamine drop, to get that reception online. But there's just more often than not, a lot of people skip too many steps. And it really, as a result, will hinder growth more than foster and develop it. So right, that's my word, take your time. You could do a few other things too, like you could use very few layers. I think there's, like, because I did a lot of training traditionally, there's no undo. So like, I think if you go into the added challenge of not using something like an undo, you'll be a little more careful and thoughtful with every stroke that you place down. Secondly, if you try to work through that bad mark or that bad color that you just lay down and paint it out or draw it out, again, that's building more mileage than just simply, I'm undoing the last 20 steps. Limit those undos and you can improve even more. I think it'll give you more control, more confidence. A lot of this, working time and time again from this very real world reference, will build that confidence that you can even start tackling subjects that you're not comfortable or familiar with, because you'll have such a good foundation in one area. And a lot of art and a lot of design really does transcend into other categories and themes, of course. And having I've followed a certain process here, of course, as you saw through the execution of this. There's always little things I do differently, depending on the subject or genre, or whether I have a photo or a 3D. But like if I'm just painting an image like this, more or less from scratch, the mindset is pretty much always baseline very similar in terms of, like, I do A, then B, then C, big to small, background to foreground, light into shadow, details into texture, things like that, the automatic execution stuff. But like, again, if I had to switch that up, it wouldn't be necessarily a big deal. But I do know if I just follow that process, that does work for me. I can consistently hit most marks, that I want to. And then, right, it's just getting that accuracy better. And of course, as your eye is observing all this too, your mark and your own bar for like how you see and perceive things will just get better. So you'll be able to like this, you'll be able to make that call, like this doesn't look good, or this is unappealing, or like, and then of course why, and why it is. And when you ask the whys, self-diagnosing, whether you're drawing over your art or your sketches, or you're literally getting feedback in groups, which you can do very, very frequently in the Brush Sauce and the Patreon Discord group. People are doing this every day and improving tremendously. And I think it does take a good amount of feedback. Having a good feedback loop of, from peers is a fantastic way to kind of keep, your perspective on things as well. So I'm just going in here, adding a little, like I have some brush strokes there, but I want like a more firm sort of pattern that I can build like a little bit of a texture with. It just so happens this is a rock brush that I like a little bit, because it makes a lot of quick little marks that for me to do manually would be, a tremendous amount of effort and time. So for me, like expediting, this part of the process is a great way to fulfill that need I have in terms of getting that rhythm here. Again, it's a dark against a lighter piece, which is like the snow, and it's like smaller, harder little shapes against the softer, more expressive brushwork of the snow too. I like that contrast, that and of course too the sense of movement that this design aesthetic that like I just added in provides, for the picture, and that's how I'm internalizing it. That's how I'm really thinking about it there. So yeah, I'm just kind of touching this up, and then we'll just go in and more or less I do a few final thoughts and some takeaways from this. All right, folks, that's wrapping this one up. It's been a pleasure having you on board today. There was a few minor changes here at the end as I went back to just touch things up a little. Like I changed the mountain. It was getting busy and fussy, and some of the clouds were, so I just tried to streamline a lot of that. But yeah, it's pretty much all here now. But yeah, that's a really good, efficient way of spending anywhere from an hour to 2 working with the subject, getting to know that subject, breaking it down, analyzing it, getting in some design fundamentals, getting in some art skills, and then of course letting the imagination take over to bring things to like a quasi little concept. It's not like a full-on concept in the concept art sort of way, but I mean, with a little bit of pushing, you could get it there, a little further tweaks. But just a few last bit of takeaways here before we go. Just don't overlook the observation skills. That's a real pain point for like a lot of students as they try to get in and build fancy worlds. And just like before you do anything else, you can just draw. If you can't draw okay at a basic level, painting will probably be even harder. The goal is to, of course, train your brain, your eyes, and your hands to work together as a team. And drawing and painting are physical skills, and so the only way to get better is through loads of this sort of hands-on practice. Just like this, you could watch videos. There's books on it, fabulous books. Things like Color and Light by James Gurney, for example, which I do recommend. And of course, looking at other artists' work on ArtStation stuff is great. But it ultimately won't really help you get better at those. You have to implement, and that's what a large part of this process was here today, was implementing what we broke down and tried to understand. And you just need to do it for yourself. And if you do have trouble replicating reality with any kind of accuracy and clarity, you probably shouldn't be doing world building quite yet, at least not visually. Folks, there'll be links below for everything you need. Just a reminder, you can go to the website, brushsauceacademy.com. There is a newsletter. Sign up. I'm going to be doing portfolio templates and stuff for subscribers of that this summer. All summer long, we're going to make templates and things to help build and construct your portfolios. for various categories like concept art and illustration. So be on the lookout for that. And of course, you get other freebies for signing up as well. If you just need help in terms of recommended books or gear, there's also a nice little section there for that. All right, take it easy, guys.